He fired 7 tutors in 8 months. Not because he was stupid. Because he was dangerous. Han Do-hyun had a gift, the kind that could dismantle a grown adult's confidence in under 4 minutes. His father had money, the kind that made problems disappear. And every tutor who walked through those glass doors eventually disappeared too. Until she didn't. Naledi Mawagi didn't flinch when a 16-year-old told her she didn't belong. She didn't apologize when she contradicted a powerful executive in his own home. She came to do one thing, and she refused to leave until it was done. But nobody warned her about the father. Nobody told her that grief could look like control. That loneliness could wear a 3-piece suit and speak in board meeting language. What happens when the boy starts healing and his father starts feeling? Stay until the end. You'll understand why she stayed. Subscribe, hit like, and let's begin. The whiteboard marker hit the floor before Naledi even finished writing the equation. She didn't turn around immediately. She let the sound settle, the sharp plastic crack against imported Italian marble, the silence that followed it, the specific kind of silence that a 16-year-old boy manufactures when he wants to see how fast he can make someone crack. She had heard that silence before, in Johannesburg, in Nairobi, in a reform school in Cape Town where boys twice as dangerous as Han Do-hyun had tried the same theater and failed. She capped her marker, turned, and looked at him. He was sprawled in his chair the way wealthy boys sprawl, with the casual confidence of someone who had never once in his life been told that his comfort was inconvenient. His school uniform blazer was hanging off one shoulder. His textbook was closed. His eyes were bright with a particular kind of intelligence that had never been properly aimed at anything useful. "You dropped something," Naledi said. "I know," Do-hyun said. "Pick it up." He looked at her the way people look at something they are deciding whether to step over or step on. "I don't pick things up. That's what the staff is for." Naledi walked to where the marker lay, crouched, and picked it up herself. Then she placed it on the table in front of him. Not handed it to him. Placed it. With precision. The way you place a document in front of someone before they sign something they cannot take back. "Today we're covering behavioral economics," she said, returning to the board. "It's about why people make the choices they make, even when those choices cost them more than they gain. Pay attention. It will be relevant to your life." She could feel him staring at the back of her head. She kept writing. "My father pays you," Do-hyun said. "Which means technically, you work for me." "Your father pays my agency," Naledi said without turning. "My agency pays me. Which means the only person I work for is the contract, and the contract says I'm here to educate you. Now." She turned. "Would you like to tell me why a rational actor consistently chooses short-term dominance over long-term competence, or would you like to keep testing whether I'm going to cry?" Something shifted in his face. It was small, barely a quarter-inch movement around his jaw, but Naledi had spent 11 years reading adolescent faces. She filed it away. "My last tutor cried," Do-hyun said. It wasn't bragging. It was information, delivered flatly, the way he might mention the weather. "I know," Naledi said. "I read the file your father sent." "All of them?" "All 7. He sat up slightly. "And you still came?" "I almost didn't," she said honestly. "Then I looked at your academic scores from 3 years ago and decided you were worth the inconvenience." He said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then he opened his textbook. It wasn't surrender. Naledi understood that. It was reconnaissance. He was regrouping, recalibrating, deciding on a new strategy. Boys like Do-hyun didn't stop, they changed tactics. She had 2, maybe 3 weeks before he came at her from a different angle, one she hadn't anticipated. She needed to understand him faster than he could understand her. She had work to do. The Han residence existed in a category of wealth that had moved beyond showing off. It wasn't decorated to impress visitors. It was designed the way a museum is designed, with the quiet confidence of something that expects to be studied, not questioned. Every corner was precise. Every piece of furniture had been chosen by someone who understood that restraint, done correctly, was its own form of arrogance. Hans Seorian worked from his home office on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Naledi had been briefed on the schedule. She had also, in her third week, begun to notice that on those evenings, he would find reasons to be in the hallway that connected his office to the study room where she tutored Dohian. She didn't comment on it. She simply noted it. On the Thursday of her third week, as she was packing her materials at the end of a session, Seorian appeared at the doorway. He was still in his work clothes, charcoal trousers, a white shirt with the top button open, a watch that cost more than most people's cars. He had the posture of a man who had spent 20 years in rooms where posture mattered. "How is he doing?" he asked. His Korean was precise, his English careful. He had been told she was fluent in both. He used English, which she suspected was deliberate, a way of meeting her on neutral ground. "He's testing the architecture of my patience," Naledi said, clicking her bag shut. Which is actually a good sign. Boys who've completely given up don't test. They just disappear behind compliance. Dohian still cares about the outcome. He just doesn't know what outcome he wants. Seorian was quiet for a moment. The other tutors described him as hostile. "He is hostile," Naledi said. "That's not the problem. Hostile is just afraid with better vocabulary." Seorian looked at her the way people look at a sentence they need to hear again before they believe it. He didn't repeat it. But something in his shoulders changed, infinitesimally, like a building settling. "He doesn't talk to me about his mother," Seorian said. He wasn't asking for advice. He was stating a fact, the way exhausted people sometimes state facts into empty rooms, not because they expect an answer, but because saying it out loud is the only thing left to do. "I know," Naledi said. "How do you know?" "Because he doesn't talk to me about her either. But every time I reference legacy, or long-term impact, or what we leave behind, his handwriting changes. He presses harder on the page." She paused. "He's carrying something he doesn't have the language for yet. My job right now is to give him the language." Seorian looked at the study table where his son had sat 90 minutes ago, dismissive and sharp-tongued and secretly, terrifyingly alone. "And if he refuses to use it? Then I'll wait until he runs out of other options," Naledi said simply. "Grief is patient. I just have to be more patient than it is." She said goodnight and left. Seorian stood in the empty study room for 4 minutes before his phone rang and pulled him back to a world he knew how to navigate. Dohian made his next move on a Monday. He arrived at the session with a printout, a copy of an article from an international education journal, published 8 years ago, written by a researcher in Accra who had argued that Naledi's methodological framework for adolescent behavioral intervention was conceptually ambitious but empirically insufficient. He placed it on the table in front of her with the careful deliberateness of someone laying down a card they have been holding for weeks. "Interesting reading for the weekend," he said. Naledi picked it up and read the abstract without rushing. Then she set it down. "Dr. Asante's critique was valid in 2017, she said. "I wrote the response paper. It's in the same journal, 2018. The methodology has since been adopted by 14 school districts across 4 countries. Would you like me to print that too, or are we done with this portion of the exercise?" Dohian's eyes narrowed slightly. "You remembered the year. I remember everything about my work." "Why?" The question surprised her. It was the first genuine question he had asked, not a challenge dressed as a question, not a trap framed as curiosity. A real one. "Because the work matters," she said. "And things that matter deserve to be remembered correctly." He looked down at the printout. "My mother used to say something like that." The room went very still. Naledi didn't move toward the opening. She didn't widen her eyes or soften her voice or do any of the things that would tell him she had been waiting for exactly this. She simply said, "Did she?" and kept her voice at the same temperature it had been when they were discussing the journal article. Dohian pulled the printout back toward himself. "She was a literature professor," he said. "She said every book deserved to be read like the author was still alive. Like their words were still happening. That's a sophisticated way to approach a text, Naledi said. She was sophisticated, he said. And then, as if he'd accidentally stepped too far into a room he hadn't meant to enter, his jaw set and his eyes went flat. Can we get back to the assignment? We never left it, Naledi said, and turned to the board. She didn't write anything for a moment. She just stood there, marker in hand, giving him the time to gather himself without making it obvious that she knew he needed it. Then she began writing, and the session continued, and Dovian did not drop the marker, and did not sprawl in his chair, and answered 3 questions correctly without being prompted. It was, by any reasonable measure, a very good day. The incident happened in the 5th week. Dovian had an interim evaluation, a standardized assessment that counted toward his school's end-of-term academic record. Naledi had spent 2 weeks preparing him. Not drilling. Preparing, which was different. Drilling filled a container. Preparation taught the student to build the container themselves. He failed it. Not accidentally. Deliberately. Naledi received the results via the school's automated system before Seorian did. She sat with the numbers for 1 hour before the father called. He scored 41%, Seorian said. His voice was the kind of quiet that is louder than shouting. On a test you spent 2 weeks preparing him for. Yes, Naledi said. Explain. He knows the material. He chose not to demonstrate it. Why? Because passing the evaluation would have meant admitting that what I'm doing is working. And he's not ready to admit that yet. There was silence on the line. Then, come to the house tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. The meeting was in Seorian's office, the real one, not the sitting room where he usually spoke with staff. The real office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden, a desk the size of a dining table, and the kind of silence that accumulated in rooms where serious decisions were made regularly. Dovian sat in a chair across from his father. Naledi sat to the side, not between them, not behind them. Adjacent. Present but not mediating. Seorian placed the printed evaluation results on the desk. He didn't slide them forward dramatically. He just placed them there, the way Naledi had once placed a marker. 41%, he said to his son. Dovian said nothing. You scored 93 on the practice assessment last week. Still nothing. I've been patient with this process, Seorian said. I've given it room. I've respected Ms. Miyagi's approach without interference. I want to know directly, from you, why you wasted both her time and mine. Dovian looked at the window. Maybe she's not as good as you think she is. Naledi felt Seorian look at her. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. Don't. He listened. Ms. Miyagi is not on trial in this room, Seorian said. You are. And the verdict is not academic. It's a question of character. Did you deliberately fail that evaluation? Dovian's jaw worked. Yes. Why? Because I felt like it. That's not a reason, Seorian said. That's an excuse with the explanation removed. Try again. The silence stretched. Dovian looked at the desk, then at his father, then at Naledi, and it was the look at Naledi that cracked something, because she met his eyes without judgment, without satisfaction, without the I told you so that he had been bracing for. Because if I fail, Dovian said, slowly, like a person finding stepping stones in dark water, then she hasn't changed anything. And if she hasn't changed anything, then I'm still, he stopped. Still what? His father asked. The boy's throat moved. Still the same. Still just the same. Seorian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Not softer exactly. More honest. Being the same is not a permanent sentence. It's a current position. Dovian looked at his father like he had not actually looked at him in a very long time. The consequence, Seorian continued, is that you will sit the evaluation again in 2 weeks. You will apply yourself fully. And you will write a formal apology to Ms. Miyagi for wasting her professional time. Not a verbal apology. Written. Considered. Delivered. Do-hyeon's eyes cut to Naledi. She wants an apology? I don't want anything, Naledi said, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Your father has decided that you owe one. What I want is for you to understand the difference between those two things. He stared at her. An apology given because someone demands it is a transaction, she said. An apology given because you understand the weight of what you did, that's growth. Your father is giving you the opportunity to choose which one this is. Do-hyeon looked at his hands. Then he looked up. Can I go? Yes, Seorian said. The boy left. Seorian waited until the sound of his footsteps disappeared down the hallway. Then he exhaled, not dramatically, just fully, like a man putting down something he had been carrying for miles. He's testing whether I'll choose him over the process, Naledi said quietly. I know, Seorian said. You did the right thing. Seorian looked at the evaluation results on his desk. I spend a lot of time making decisions I'm certain about. He paused. I'm not certain about very much with him right now. That's the most honest thing I've heard from you, Naledi said. He looked at her sharply. Not offended. Surprised. I don't mean it as a criticism, she said. Certainty is efficient. But it's not always accurate. Especially with grief. Seorian went still. I'm not grieving. Your son is, Naledi said. And grief doesn't stay in one room. It moves through a house. It gets into the walls. She gathered her bag and stood. He needs to see you uncertain sometimes. Not incompetent, uncertain. There's a difference. Incompetence is a weakness. Uncertainty is honesty. He's 16 and he's been watching a perfect performance for 5 years. He doesn't know how to be imperfect in front of you because he thinks perfection is the only currency you accept. She left the office. Seorian sat at his desk for a long time after that, in the silence where serious decisions are made, and made nothing except the small, difficult acknowledgement that she was right. 3 days later, a folded piece of paper appeared on Naledi's materials before the session began. She didn't open it while Do-hyeon was watching. She set it aside and taught the full lesson, a session on ethical leadership, which she framed not as a moral lecture but as a case study on strategic reputation management, because she had learned that he received ideas better when they arrived through the side door. He participated. Fully. He argued, pushed back on 2 of her case studies with actual logic, and correctly identified the flaw in a leadership decision that most undergraduate students missed. When he left, she opened the paper. It was handwritten. Not short. He had clearly written it multiple times before landing on this version. She could see where pressure lines from previous drafts had indented the page. It said, I wasted your time because I was afraid the time wouldn't be wasted. I know that sounds strange. It is strange. I don't fully understand it. But you said you'd wait, and I tested that, and you're still here. I'm not used to that. I don't have a better way of saying it. This is the apology. Naledi read it twice. Then she folded it, put it in her bag, and drove home. In her apartment that night, she allowed herself a full 2 minutes of feeling something she was professionally obligated not to feel, the particular tenderness that arrives when a closed thing opens for the first time, slowly, like something that has been shut for so long it has forgotten the mechanics of being open. 2 minutes. Then she made tea and wrote her session notes and kept it professional. The change in Do-hyeon was not cinematic. It didn't arrive with swelling music or a single dramatic moment that restructured everything. It arrived the way real change arrives, gradually, then undeniably. His school called Seorian to report that Do-hyeon had intervened in a bullying incident in the junior corridor. He hadn't reported it to a teacher. He had stopped it himself, directly, by putting himself between the group and the target and saying, with the full force of whatever social architecture he had built over years of being feared, that's enough. The junior student had cried. Not from fear. From relief. Do-hyeon had reportedly stood there, unsure what to do with someone crying out of gratitude, and eventually patted the boy's shoulder twice in the awkward, touching way of someone performing a gesture they have never been shown but somehow know is correct. When Naledi heard this from Seorian in their weekly meeting, she did not say "I told you so." She said, "He learned that from someone." Seorian frowned slightly. "From you. From watching you back my authority when he tested it," she said. "He learned that consequence delivered with consistency is a form of care. He's applying it." Seorian was quiet. They were sitting in the kitchen this time. The formal office had gradually given way to the kitchen table, which neither of them had discussed or acknowledged. The kitchen was where the actual meetings happened now, over coffee, with the city visible through the window and the professional distance appropriately maintained and also quietly, persistently eroding. "I owe you something," Seorian said. "You pay my agency on time," Naledi said. "That's not what I mean." She looked at him. "When you said he was grieving me while sitting across from me," he stopped. He was not a man who started sentences without knowing where they ended, and this was clearly one he had not finished constructing yet. She waited. "I had built something after she died. A structure. Very efficient. The company grew 40%. Dohian had every resource he needed. Everything was provided for. I thought provision was the same as presence." "It's a common error," Naledi said. "It's not an error I should have made," he said. "I'm 45 years old. I know the difference between managing something and inhabiting it. Grief changes the vocabulary," she said. "Things that used to mean one thing start meaning another. Presence starts feeling like exposure. So you manage instead of inhabit. It's not stupidity. It's survival." He looked at her steadily. "You speak about grief with a lot of specificity." "I lost my mother at 28, she said. "And my first response was to get a 3rd degree." He almost smiled. It was a small thing, barely there, but it fundamentally reorganized his face. "What was the second response?" he asked. "I'm still figuring that out," she said. "I'll let you know." The dinner invitation arrived via Dohian. He knocked on the kitchen doorframe on a Thursday evening when Naledi had stayed late to work through an additional practice paper. He had a look of studied casualness that Naledi recognized immediately as an adolescent performing a scheme they have convinced themselves is invisible. "My father mentioned it would be good to have a family dinner," Dohian said. "For continuity. Between home and academic environment." Naledi put down her pen. "Did he say that?" "Something like that." "What did he actually say?" Dohian's eyes moved to the left for exactly 1 second, long enough. "He said we should eat together sometime." "And it was your idea to frame it as academically relevant?" "It is academically relevant." Dohian. He met her eyes. And then, for the first time in their entire acquaintance, he grinned. It was a real grin, unguarded, briefly boyish, startling in the way that sincerity is always startling when it arrives in the face of someone who has been performing sophistication. "He talks about you differently than he talks about anyone else," Dohian said. "I'm his son's tutor. I've had 7 tutors. He talked about all of them the same way he talks about the house's maintenance staff. He talks about like." Dohian stopped, tilted his head. "He thinks before he answers questions about you. He's not used to thinking before he answers questions. He usually just knows." Naledi was quiet. "He's not broken," Dohian said, with a seriousness that made him sound, briefly, much older than 16. "I thought for a while that he was. But I think he just forgot how to want things that weren't about the company or about me. And you're neither." "This is a sophisticated observation for a dinner invitation," Naledi said. "I've been learning from a sophisticated person," he said. She accepted the dinner. The dinner itself was, objectively, an exercise in the quiet chaos of 3 people who are all too observant pretending not to observe each other. Dohian had told the kitchen staff to prepare something South African. He had apparently spent 40 minutes researching this, which Naledi found both touching and mortifying. They had done their best. The effort was genuine, the result approximate, and Naledi aided with sincere appreciation and only corrected two things, very gently, for educational purposes. Sioran had changed from his work clothes. He was in a dark blue knit sweater and looked, without the armor of his work uniform, like a different version of himself, not less powerful, but differently powered. Like something running on a quieter engine. Defiant positioned himself strategically throughout the evening, asking questions that required Naledi and Sioran to respond to each other, excusing himself to get water at precise moments, and at one point stage whispering to his father in Korean that he should ask Naledi about her work in Cape Town, forgetting, or pretending to forget, that Naledi's Korean was excellent. She took pity on him and asked about it herself. By 10 o'clock, when Defiant announced he had homework to finish and retreated in a way that fooled absolutely nobody, Naledi and Sioran were alone at the table with the remnants of the meal and a conversation that had somehow, without either of them scheduling it, become genuinely personal. He did all of this on purpose, Sioran said, looking at the doorway his son had disappeared through. Obviously, Naledi said. Is it strange, being maneuvered by a 16-year-old? He's your son, she said. He learned from somewhere. Sioran looked at her. I don't maneuver. You've been in the hallway outside the study room every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 weeks, she said pleasantly. He was silent. I don't mind, she said. And she meant it. And they both understood it meant something more than what it said. If you're still here, still in this story, then you already know it's doing something to you. Subscribe before the next part takes you somewhere you didn't expect. Keep watching. The news arrived from Johannesburg on a Wednesday. The University of the Witwatersrand was expanding its Adolescent Behavioral Research Institute. They were offering Naledi a senior fellowship, the kind that comes once, that reshapes a career's entire trajectory, that other people in her field spent their professional lives working toward without reaching. She called her mentor first. Then she sat in her car outside the Han residence for 12 minutes doing nothing except looking at her hands. She had a contract here. 4 more months. Defiant was at an inflection point, a genuine one, not a performance. Sioran was something she hadn't named yet, something she was professionally obligated not to name, but that she thought about at the end of sessions when the day went quiet. She went inside and taught the session. She did not mention the offer. That evening, she told Sioran in the hallway, because he was there, as he always was on Thursdays. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once. Congratulations, he said. I haven't decided, she said. What are you deciding between, he asked. His voice was careful, very careful, in the way of someone who has something significant to lose and is trying hard not to put that weight on the other person. I don't know yet, she said. He nodded again. Take the time you need. She went home. She didn't sleep well. Defiant found out from the household manager, who had overheard Naledi telling Sioran in the hallway. The household manager told the head of staff in confidence. The head of staff told the cook in confidence. The cook mentioned it within range of Defiant while he was eating breakfast, and Defiant sat very still over his rice for a long moment before going to school without finishing it. He didn't say anything to Naledi that day. Or the next. On the Friday, he arrived at the session early, which had never happened, and sat at the table waiting. When Naledi came in, he was looking at the board where she'd left some notes from the previous session. You're leaving, he said. I'm considering an offer, she said. To go back to South Africa. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Is it good? It's excellent. Then you should take it, he said. He said it flat, without emotion, and she recognized the mechanism, the performance of indifference as a way of preemptively managing loss. Defiant, she said. I'm fine, he said. Let's start. We'll start in a minute. She sat down across from him, which she didn't usually do. She usually stood at the board. Look at me. He did. You're allowed to not be fine, she said. His jaw tightened. I said I'm. You're allowed, she repeated, to not be fine. About this, or about anything. Not being fine is not a malfunction. It's information. Something moved across his face. He looked at the table. "I don't want you to go," he said. The sentence came out blunt and undecorated, the way honest things do when someone stops working to hide them. "I know," she said. "You changed things," he said. "Here. In the house. It's different now. My father is," he stopped. Started again. "He laughs sometimes. Not at something funny on his phone or at a business joke. Just, he laughs. Like he remembered that's a thing he can do." He looked up. "I hadn't heard him laugh since my mother was alive." Naledi held very still. "If you leave, I think things go back," Dovian said. "I don't think they have to. But I think they will. And I'm not," his throat moved. "I'm not ready for them to go back." She thought about all the professional things she could say. About continuity of care, about sustainability of progress, about how true growth doesn't depend on any single person's presence. Instead she said, "You're the one who wrote in that apology letter that I was still there when you expected me to leave. You said you weren't used to that." "Yes," he said. "Would it change anything to know that I'm still deciding because of what I might be leaving, and not only because of what's being offered?" He looked at her for a long time. "Does my father know that?" "That's not a conversation I've had with him." "Then you should probably have it," he said, with a precision that was all Han family genetics and none of the mess that had surrounded it for years. She didn't plan the timing of it. She told herself it was accidental because she was not quite ready to admit that she had driven back to the Han residence at 7 in the evening on a Friday without a session scheduled. Sioran answered the door himself. The staff had weekends. He looked at her without surprise. Like he had been, on some level, waiting. "I was in the area," she said. "You live 40 minutes from here," he said. "I was in the extended area." He stepped back and let her in. They ended up in the kitchen again, because that was where the real things happened in this house now, and Naledi made tea because her hands needed something to do, and Sioran sat at the table with his hands flat on the surface like a man who has decided to stop doing things with them for a while. "I want to tell you something," Naledi said, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond." "All right," he said. "I'm very good at my job," she said. "I'm not saying that arrogantly, I'm saying it because it's relevant. I have spent 11 years learning how to be useful to people without becoming necessary to them. There's a difference. Necessary creates dependency. Useful creates capacity. I am always aiming for useful." She paused. "I have not, in 11 years, once had to think carefully about that distinction in relation to myself. I have always been on the outside of the dynamic. A professional. The instrument. The person who leaves when the work is done." Sioran said nothing. His face was entirely still. "This house has made that difficult to maintain," she said. "Your son has made it difficult. You have made it," she stopped, started again. "You have made it something I have to actively work against. And I don't know if I want to keep working against it." "Naledi," he said. "Let me finish." "You're finished," he said gently. "You finished the relevant part already." She looked at him. "I have something to tell you as well," he said, "and it is not articulate, because this is not something I have vocabulary for anymore, or possibly ever. My wife was the person who handled this. She was better at saying true things out loud. I'm better at logistics and quarterly projections." He took a breath. "But here is the logistics of it. You are the first person in 5 years who has been in this house and made it feel like a home. Not by decorating it or filling it with sound. Just by being in it. The way you are in it, precise and principled and present. You are present in a way that I forgot was possible. And Dovian is present now too. For the first time since he was 11 years old, my son is actually in the same room as me, not just occupying the same square footage." He looked at her steadily. "I am not asking you to give up a fellowship for my feelings. That is not a request I have the right to make. What I'm asking, if I'm asking anything, is whether you are making this decision with full information. And the full information includes the fact that this family would like very much for you to stay. Not as an employee. Not as Do-hyun's tutor. But as whoever you would like to be to us, if you chose to stay. Naledi looked at him for a long time. That's very well put, she said, for someone with no vocabulary for it. I had time to think, he said. How long? Approximately 6 weeks, he said. Since the first Tuesday I stood in the hallway. She laughed. It surprised her, not the fact of laughing, but the texture of it, the way it arrived fully, without apology. I haven't made a decision, she said. I know, he said. I'm not asking for one tonight. I'll let you know, she said. I know that too, he said. She finished her tea and drove home, 40 minutes each way, and this time she slept. She called the university and asked for 2 weeks. They gave her 10 days. She spent them doing 3 things: finishing the curriculum she had designed for Do-hyun's next academic phase, writing 6 pages of follow-up notes for any practitioner who might take over, and sitting with the question of what she wanted, not what was professionally correct, not what she should want, but what she, Naledi Mawagi, 32 years old, away from home longer than she'd planned, wanted for the next portion of her own life. She had a conversation with her mother's sister in Gaborone, who said, "You've never once in your life asked me for relationship advice. That means this is serious." She had a conversation with her colleague in Cape Town, who said, "The fellowship will come around again. Men like that don't." She had a conversation with herself, at 2 in the morning, in the particular way that you have with yourself when all the other conversations are done and it's just you and the actual answer, which you have already known for some time but needed the other conversations to confirm. Then she called the university. Then she called Seorian. He answered on the second ring. I called the university, she said. Yes, he said. I negotiated a deferred start date, she said. 18 months. With a remote research component that I can manage from anywhere with a functioning internet connection. Silence on the line. Long enough that she could hear him breathing. I'm not staying because of you, she said. I want to be clear about that, because I think it's important that we both understand my reasons correctly. I'm staying because Do-hyun is at a stage of development where continuity has measurable long-term impact, and I'm the practitioner with the most contextual knowledge of his case, and it would be professionally irresponsible to leave now. Of course, Seorian said. She could hear clearly that he was smiling. Also, she said. Also, he said. Also, I'm staying because this house got into me, she said. And I'm curious about what that means. I am as well, he said. Very curious. This is going to require extensive communication, she said. I have unlimited patience for that, he said. You have a limited vocabulary for it, she corrected. I'm willing to expand it, he said. She went to sleep. The resit evaluation result arrived on a Tuesday. Do-hyun scored 88%. He didn't bring it to the session. Naledi found out from the school's automated system notification. She printed it and placed it on the table before he arrived. He walked in, saw it, and looked at her. 88, she said. I know what I scored. Why not 93, she asked. That's what you got on the practice. He sat down. I was nervous. You were nervous, Naledi repeated, and something in her voice made him look at her quickly. Is that bad, he asked. No, she said. It's human. 93 on a practice means you know the material. 88 on the real thing means you're a real person taking a real test. The difference is healthy. She paused. The old you would have sabotaged it. The current you was just nervous. That's significant. He looked at the paper for a moment. Ms. Mawagi. Yes. I heard you're staying. I am. He nodded slowly. He picked up his pen. Okay, he said. Just that. Okay. It was, in the language of Han Do-hyun, everything. The months that followed were ordinary in the way that meaningful things often are, full of sessions and school reports and kitchen conversations and the gradual, unscheduled accumulation of a life being rebuilt around different foundations. Do-hyeon's school reports became the kind that teachers write when they have finally stopped managing a student and started genuinely teaching one. His social relationships, which had previously been entirely transactional, maintained out of social utility, discarded when no longer useful, began to include something that looked like actual friendship. He was still sharp. Still exacting. Still capable of a silence so precise it communicated entire arguments without a word. But the sharpness was pointed outward now, at ideas and problems, instead of inward at everyone in arm's reach. He apologized to the school staff member he had humiliated in his first month at the new session. He did it privately, without being asked, and without telling anyone he had done it. Naledi found out because the staff member mentioned it to the household manager, who mentioned it to the cook, who mentioned it within range of Do-hyeon's hearing at breakfast, and Do-hyeon's only visible response was to eat his entire meal without the restless, dissatisfied energy that had previously characterized his mornings. He was becoming someone. Not the someone his arrogance had insisted he already was, but the someone he actually had the capacity to be, which was more interesting and considerably less exhausting. Seorian, for his part, stopped standing in hallways and started sitting at kitchen tables. He started showing up for dinners that were not strategically structured by a 16-year-old. He started having conversations about things that were not logistical, conversations that required him to have opinions, vulnerabilities, and the willingness to be seen not knowing an answer. He was not naturally good at this. He practiced. That he practiced at all was the point. Go Myangil, who visited on the first Saturday of each month, watched all of this with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had once, at exactly the right moment, said to his grieving friend, "You need someone in that house who cannot be bought or impressed." And then found Naledi's agency in a professional directory and forwarded the information with a single line, "Consider this." He never mentioned it. He didn't need to. Do-hyeon stood at the podium under the lights of the school hall and looked at the audience without nervousness. He had been given the Leadership Recognition Award by the school board, not for academics, though his academics had recovered comprehensively. For demonstrated peer influence and community responsibility. The citation referenced the incident in the junior corridor that had begun a pattern of visible, consistent integrity. Seorian sat in the front row with Go Myangil. Naledi sat beside Seorian, not in an employee's chair, not at the side. Beside him. The difference was not lost on anyone who looked, and several people looked. Do-hyeon held the award and spoke briefly about the year. He thanked the school. He acknowledged his teachers. He said his father's name without any of the complicated distance that had previously made the syllables uncomfortable. Then he looked at Naledi. "There's someone here," he said, "who told me once that respect is taught by staying consistent. I want to say publicly that I spent about 6 weeks trying to make her leave, and I'm grateful that she doesn't take instruction from 16-year-olds. He paused, and a ripple of laughter moved through the hall, gentle and warm. "She didn't come here to fix me. She came here to teach me. And those are completely different things. Being fixed means someone does something to you. Learning means you do something to yourself, with the right person in the room making it possible." He looked at the award in his hands. "She taught me that consistency is a form of love. She taught me that honest uncertainty is braver than performed certainty. She taught me how to be a person instead of a performance." He looked up. "I don't have a better way to say it. So I'll just say she is not my tutor anymore. She is the person who taught me how to be human. And I think our family is better for it." He said thank you and stepped back from the podium. Seorian was very still beside Naledi. His throat moved once. He did not look at her, because if he looked at her right now he would do something that would not be appropriate in a school hall with 200 parents watching, and he knew that about himself with sufficient self-awareness to make the right call. She put her hand over his on the armrest. Briefly. Quietly. In the particular language of people who have started building something that doesn't have a name yet but is, unmistakably, real. In the row behind them, Go Myangil caught the movement and looked away at exactly the right moment, which was the most useful thing a longtime friend could do and which he did without being asked, because he had always been good at knowing when his role was to witness and when it was to disappear. Dovian came back to his seat and sat down between his father and the woman who had refused to leave, and he looked straight ahead at the stage with the expression of someone who has just accomplished something they are too proud to make obvious. He was 16. He had learned, imperfectly and slowly and with enormous resistance, how to love people in a way they could actually feel. He had learned it the way all real things are learned, not in a single moment, but across dozens of ordinary ones, with someone consistent enough to stay through all of them. He had learned it from a woman who had picked up a marker from the floor without complaint and placed it back in front of him, and from a father who had backed that authority without being asked, and from the accumulation of all the small, unremarkable moments between those two events. His father was not just a businessman anymore. He was a man standing at the edge of something new with both eyes open, which is more courage than most people manage in a lifetime, and which he was managing by sheer, deliberate, imperfect effort, which was the only honest way it could be done. And Naledi Mawagi, 32, South African, principled and patient and privately quite certain she had made the right call, sat in a school hall in Seoul and felt, for the first time in a long time, exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because someone needed her. Because this was where she had chosen to be. There is a significant difference between those two things. She had said that to a boy once, in a study room, about apologies. It turned out it applied to most things worth choosing. If this story stayed with you, if Dovian's apology letter broke something open, if the hallway appearances made you smile, if Naledi's decision felt like something you needed to see, then you already know what kind of storytelling this channel believes in. Subscribe. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the most important changes happen quietly, between ordinary people, in ordinary rooms, when someone simply refuses to leave. And comment below, who did you see yourself in? The boy who had forgotten how to be open? The father who confused provision with presence? Or the woman who stayed, not because she had to, but because she chose to? See you in the next story.